Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The wind whispered across the emerald hills, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers through the ancient land of Exile. The sky stretched vast and endless, painted in hues of deep blue and soft amber, as the last rays of sunlight kissed the earth goodbye. At the heart of this enchanted land stood the hill of Tara, where the air itself thrummed with magic, the weight of centuries pressing upon the stones. The gathered Tuatha De Danann, their robes shimmering like woven moonlight, stood in solemn council, their voices a murmur of deliberation. At the center of the chamber, beneath the glow of enchanted torches, sat the sacred stone table, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly with an ancient energy. The question before them was one that would shape their people's future. Who would rule in the years to come? Among the noble figures gathered, one man stood taller than the rest. Lur, a warrior of unmatched renown, had long been the defender of his kin. His blade had cleaved through countless foes, his strategies had secured their victories, and his name had been spoken with reverence across the land. Many believed he was the natural choice, the warrior king destined to lead. Yet as the council debated, another name had taken root in their hearts, Bodhi-Durg, a man of wisdom and diplomacy, chosen not for the strength of his arm, but for the clarity of his mind. The voices around the chamber swayed like reeds in the wind, until finally the elder Arwen stood, her silvered hair gleaming in the torchlight. "It is decided," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of finality. Bodhi-Durg shall be our king. A hush fell upon the chamber, followed by an eruption of applause. Yet not all hands joined in the celebration. Lur remained silent, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes fixed upon Bodhi with an intensity that sent a hush rippling through the crowd. Slowly, he rose to his full height, the air growing heavy with his presence. "This is folly," he said, his voice edged with the sharpness of steel. "Have I not fought for our people? Have I not bled for them, sacrificed for them? And yet, you pass me over for a man of words rather than deeds." His gaze flickered to the council, daring them to deny his worth. Bodhi-Durg met Lur's glare with an even calm. "You are a great warrior, Lur. No one denies your valor, but a king must be more than his sword." Lur's fists curled at his sides, a storm raging beneath his composed facade. "A kingdom does not stand on words alone," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "You will regret this." And with that, he turned on his heel, his crimson cloak billowing behind him like the unfolding wings of a raven. The air in the chamber remained thick with tension long after he had gone. Outside, Lur mounted his black steed, the beast's breath rising in clouds against the cool evening air. He rode away from Tara without a backward glance, his mind a tempest of wounded pride and simmering betrayal. The land blurred past him in streaks of green and gold, yet he barely saw it. They had taken from him what should have been his. They had cast him aside, as though he were nothing more than a relic of war, a blade to be wielded, but never allowed to rule. By the time he reached his stronghold, the sky had darkened, the first stars beginning to prick the heavens. The walls of his fortress stood tall against the encroaching night, a testament to his power. Yet tonight, even its sight did little to soothe him. He dismounted and strode inside, the great hall falling silent as his men turned to him, sensing the fury that coiled beneath his skin. His most trusted warrior, Dougal, stepped forward cautiously. "What has happened?" he asked, though the answer was already etched across Lur's face. "They have chosen another," Lur said, his voice like distant thunder. "Bodhi Dirk sits upon the throne that should have been mine." Murmurs rippled through the hall, some voices rising in anger, others in uncertainty. Dougal's gaze remained steady. "And what will you do?" Lur exhaled sharply, the firelight flickering in his dark eyes. "For now, nothing. But I will not forget this insult, nor will I forgive it." A silence settled over them, heavy with unspoken intent. The night stretched on, but sleep did not find Lur. He stood by the high window of his chamber, staring out into the endless dark, his mind turning over every slight, every moment that had led him here. The gods had played their hand, but Lur had not yet played his. The days passed like drifting embers, each one feeding the slow-burning fire of resentment within Lur. He ruled his stronghold with an iron will, his warriors standing ever at the ready, bound to him by loyalty deeper than mere politics. Yet even as his fortress bustled with life, an emptiness grew within him, an ache that battle could not cure. His men watched him with wary eyes, sensing the storm that brewed behind his silence. Dougal, ever the voice of reason, sought to soothe his lord's wounded pride. "You still hold power, Lur," he said one evening as they sat before the great hearth. "Tara may belong to Bodhi Dirk, but this land still bends to your will. You have not lost everything, but Lur's pride was a thing not so easily placated. It is not only the land I sought to rule, Dougal. It was my destiny. They have stolen that from me." Still, the days turned to weeks, and the embers of his fury cooled, though they never fully extinguished. He focused instead on his family, his wife, the gentle Epha, and their 4 children, who were the light that softened the harsh edges of his world. Finola, the eldest, was as wise as she was beautiful, with eyes that held the depth of a woman far beyond her years. Aod, the eldest son, was quiet and thoughtful, a child who saw more than he spoke. The twins, Fiacra and Khan, were laughter and mischief woven into human form, their boundless energy filling the halls with joy. With them, Lur found a peace that the battlefield never could provide. Each evening, he sat by the fire with his children nestled against him, telling them tales of gods and heroes, of magic woven into the fabric of their land. Finola, ever watchful, would tilt her head and ask, "Father, do all stories have happy endings?" And Lur, running a hand through her golden hair, would answer, "Not always, my love. But the best ones live on forever. The world might have denied him a throne, but in their laughter, in their small hands clinging to his own, he had found something greater." Then Epha fell ill. It was a sickness that came swiftly, a shadow creeping through the stronghold and stealing the warmth from the air. The healers tried, weaving their spells and mixing their potions, but the fever would not break. Lur stayed by her bedside, his warriors' hands useless against this enemy. He held her, whispered promises of a future she would not see. And when the end came, he did not weep, not in front of his children. The halls of the fortress grew quieter in the days that followed. Lur walked through them like a man lost in his own home, his children watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. He had been forged in war, but this grief was a battle he did not know how to fight. Finola, sensing the weight pressing upon her father, took it upon herself to care for her younger brothers, soothing their tears in the nights when Lur could not bring himself to do so. And so the days passed in mourning. Word of Epha's passing spread swiftly, reaching the ears of Bodhi-be-Durg in Tara. The High King, despite the rift that had formed between them, sent messengers bearing condolences. But more than that, he sent an offer. Lur was a father now, alone with 4 young children in need of care. And so Bodhi-be-Durg proposed a solution. One of his daughters would come to Lur's stronghold to become his new wife, to provide stability to his household and mother his children. The offer was not given lightly, nor was it received without hesitation. Lur did not want another wife. His heart still belonged to Epha, and he had no desire to replace her. But the whispers of his advisors, of his warriors, grew louder. "The children need a mother," they said. "A household cannot run without a woman's hand." And so, after much reluctance, Lur agreed. Bodhi-be-Durg's daughter, Epha, arrived under the pale light of dawn. She was striking, tall, and elegant, with a presence that filled the room even when she spoke in hushed tones. Her eyes, green as the hills of Ire, carried the wisdom of a woman who understood the weight of duty. She did not come with soft words of comfort, nor did she try to win over the children with false sweetness. Instead, she observed, listened, and let the household adjust to her presence in its own time. At first, Lur kept his distance. He was polite but distant, never lingering in conversation longer than duty required. Epha, for her part, did not press him. She carried out her role as lady of the household with quiet efficiency, ensuring that the children were cared for, that the hearth was warm, that the meals were made. Yet, despite her efforts, she remained an outsider in a home still wrapped in the memory of Epha. The children, too, were slow to accept her. Finola, especially, held herself apart. She watched Epha with wary eyes, sensing that beneath the woman's composed exterior lay something restless, something that did not sit easily in its place, but time softened the edges of grief, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house began to breathe again. Lur found himself watching Epha in quiet moments, nodding the way she carried herself with grace even when she believed no one was looking. He saw how she sat with Aod as he read, how she indulged the twins' mischief with a bemused smile rather than scolding. She was not Epha, nor did she try to be. And for that, perhaps, he was grateful. One evening, as they stood on the ramparts of the stronghold, gazing out at the endless stretch of land before them, Lur finally broke the silence between them. "You did not want this, did you?" Epha turned, her expression unreadable. "No more than you did," she admitted. "But duty is not about what we want. It is about what is necessary." Lur studied her for a long moment before nodding. A wise answer. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. A truthful one. For the first time, Lur saw not just the woman who had been sent to him, but the woman she truly was, a survivor, like him, bound by fate and obligation. And yet, beneath the surface, something else lurked. A shadow, a hunger, something neither of them saw yet, waiting in the quiet spaces between words, something that would change everything. The stronghold settled into a rhythm, one that lulled even Lur into a fragile sense of peace. Epha played her part well. She did not seek to replace Epha, nor did she press the children to accept her as their mother. Instead, she remained patient, waiting for them to come to her in their own time. Little by little, the household adapted to her presence. Aod, quiet and perceptive, was the first to lower his guard. She caught him one evening near the hearth, his small fingers tracing patterns in the dust. "You like stories," she said, sitting beside him. "I do too." Aod glanced at her warily before nodding. "Father tells us about the great warriors. I know different stories," she offered. "Stories about the winds that whisper secrets through the valleys, about stars that guide lost souls home." Aod hesitated before asking, "Will you tell me one?" And so she did. Fiacra and Khan were harder to win over. The twins were bound to each other, a world unto themselves, always wrapped in mischief and laughter. Epha learned that their trust could not be earned with words, but rather through play, through indulging their wild races through the halls, through knowing when to scold and when to join in their laughter. Slowly, they began to warm to her, though their love for their real mother remained an unspoken wall between them. Finola, however, remained apart. She watched Epha with keen eyes, noticing the small changes, the moments when a shadow passed over the woman's expression, when her patience wore thin before she could smooth it over again. She did not openly defy her stepmother, but nor did she welcome her. Instead, she held her brothers close, a barrier that would not be easily breached. Epha's efforts did not go unnoticed by Lur. At night, when the stronghold had settled into silence, he sometimes found himself lingering in her presence longer than he meant to. He was still wary, still uncertain, but for the first time since Epha's passing, he no longer felt the weight of loneliness as sharply as before. But there were things he did not see. There were nights when Epha lay awake long after the candles had burned down, her hands clenched beneath the furs. There were moments when the sound of the children's laughter grated against her bones, when she looked at them not with warmth, but with something else, something dark and unspoken. She had believed once that she could accept this fate, that she could carve out a place in this house, in this family. But now she saw the truth. She was not Epha. She would never be Epha, no matter how much she gave, no matter how much she tried. She would always be a shadow in the presence of a woman who no longer lived, and she was tired of being a shadow. The change began subtly. At first, she withdrew, her warmth fading by degrees. The small kindnesses, the gentle smiles, one by one, they vanished. She no longer sought the children's trust. She no longer reached for lure in the quiet spaces of the night. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the skis, listening to the wind, feeling the hunger grow inside her like an ache. She longed for something more. One evening, as the stronghold prepared for rest, Finola entered the hall to find Epha alone. The fire cast long shadows across the stone walls, flickering over Epha's face as she stared into the flames, lost in thought. Finola hesitated, then stepped forward. "Are you unhappy here?" Epha blinked, startled, before turning to look at the girl. For a moment, she considered lying. But something in Finola's steady gaze made her pause. "Would you be happy?" Epha asked, her voice quiet, "if you were never truly seen?" Finola frowned. "What do you mean?" Epha exhaled slowly, standing to her full height. "You look at me and you see her, don't you? No matter what I do, no matter how I try, you will never love me as you loved her." The words were not an accusation, but rather a truth laid bare. Finola hesitated, then lifted her chin. "She was our mother. We loved her. And you do not love me." Silence. Epha smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It is all right, Finola. You do not have to say it. I have always known." Finola did not understand the full weight of those words. Not then. She only knew that something in Epha's voice sent a chill down her spine, like the wind before a storm. That night, Epha did not sleep. Instead, she called upon the magic that had been whispered to her in the dark corners of her childhood, the old spells that ran through her blood. She traced the ancient symbols in the air, murmured the forbidden words, and let the power coil around her like a serpent. She would not be forgotten. She would not be second to a ghost. The next morning, as the dawn spilled pale gold over the hills, she approached the children. They were playing in the courtyard, their laughter rising with the wind. "Come," she said, her voice honey smooth. "Let us take a journey. The lake calls to us today." The children hesitated. They rarely ventured far without their father's knowledge. But Epha's smile was easy, her tone gentle. And even Finola, with all her wariness, felt her suspicions ease. They rode for hours, the countryside unfolding around them in wild stretches of green and gold. Epha's laughter was light, her manner warm, and for the first time in weeks, the children allowed themselves to be at ease. The lake lay before them, a mirror of still water beneath the endless sky. It was beautiful, untouched, a place where the world seemed to hush and listen. Epha dismounted first, holding out a hand. "Come," she beckoned. "Let us walk together." The children followed, their steps hesitant but trusting. And then Epha spoke the words. The air shivered, the light twisted, and before the children could cry out, the spell took hold. The world blurred. Their limbs bent, their voices caught in their throats. Wings sprouted where arms had been, feathers burst from their skin, and where once 4 children had stood, there were now only 4 swans, their bodies impossibly white beneath the rising sun. They cried out in confusion, in terror, but their voices were no longer human. Their sorrowful calls echoed across the lake, and Epha, standing at the water's edge, smiled. "You will not haunt me any longer," she whispered. The wind carried her words away, lost to the endless sky, and in the heart of the lake, 4 swans glided through the water, their souls bound to a fate beyond their understanding. The lake shimmered beneath the golden touch of the rising sun, its waters still and unbroken, except for the 4 swans, their pristine white feathers glistening as they drifted aimlessly, their cries soft but filled with confusion and sorrow. They had no hands to reach for each other, no feet to run, no voices to scream. The spell had taken everything from them, reshaping them into creatures of the water and sky. Finola was the first to gather her thoughts, though her mind swam with horror. She turned to her brothers, their eyes wide, still human in their bewilderment. "Stay together," she whispered, her voice no longer that of a girl, but a song upon the air, clear and sorrowful. The twins shuddered, their wings trembling as they tried to move. Aod, always the quiet observer, finally spoke. "What has she done to us?" "She has cursed us," Finola said, though the words felt too small for the horror of what had happened. On the shore, Epha stood unmoving, watching them with an unreadable expression. The wind stirred her dark hair as she took a slow breath, then stepped closer to the water's edge. "It is done," she said simply. "You will no longer stand between me and the life I was meant to have." Finola's sorrow flared into rage. She beat her wings against the water, her heart pounding in her chest. Why have you done this?" Epha tilted her head, as though considering the question. "Because I was tired of being in her shadow," she answered, her voice quiet, almost thoughtful. "Tired of waiting to be loved, when all of you hoarded it for yourselves." Aod's voice broke. "Our mother is gone, we never meant." "It does not matter what you meant," Epha interrupted. "It matters what is." Finola's wings stilled, the weight of the moment pressing down upon her. "You will regret this," she said, her voice a whisper against the rippling water. Epha did not flinch. "No," she said, "I will not." Then she lifted her hands, the final words of the spell falling from her lips like drops of poison. A wind rushed across the lake, colder than the morning air, carrying with it the weight of something eternal. "You will remain in this form for 900 years, she declared, her voice steady. 300 years here, upon the waters of this lake. 300 more upon the storm-tossed Sea of Moil. And 300 in the western waters, where the world ends." Finola gasped. "No," she breathed. "Please, Epha." But the woman turned away, her dark cloak billowing behind her. "Your fate is sealed." The last sound was the whisper of her footsteps as she vanished into the forest, leaving behind only the wind and the sorrowful cries of 4 swans. The days that followed were a cruel kind of nightmare. At first, the children did not know how to live in their new forms. Their movements were clumsy, their wings awkward, their instincts warring with the human minds still trapped inside them. Fiacra and Khan, always inseparable, struggled the most. They called for their father in the night, their cries carrying across the still lake, hopping, praying that he would come. But no one came. Lur did not know. No one did. Ayad remained silent, his sorrow too deep to put into words. He floated near his siblings, close enough to touch, but spoke little. And Finola, strong, steady Finola, took it upon herself to keep them together. She guided them when they faltered, comforted them when the weight of their fate grew too heavy to bear. When the winds howled through the valley, she wrapped her wings around her brothers, shielding them as best she could. "We will endure," she whispered to them in the quietest hours of the night. "We are still together. That is what matters." But even her strength could not soften the cruel loneliness that settled over them. They were no longer part of the world they had known. The people of the stronghold, their father, their home, it all seemed like a dream slipping further from reach with each passing day. They had been cast aside, forgotten, left to exist in a world that was no longer their own. And yet, the world did not forget them entirely. The melody came by accident. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Fiacra, in his restlessness, tried to mimic the sound of the wind. He stretched his long neck toward the sky and let out a low, trembling note. To his surprise, it did not sound entirely like a swan's cry. Khan, ever eager, joined in, his voice softer, wavering but clear. Ayad listened, then added his own voice, a lower, steadier note that wove between theirs, like the currents beneath the lake. And Finola, whose voice had always carried more than words, closed her eyes and let the music pour from her soul. Their voices rose together, weaving through the air in a song that was not human, but not entirely that of birds either. It was something in between something that carried sorrow and longing, hope and despair. It was beautiful. The sound traveled beyond the lake, slipping through the trees, carried by the wind, until it reached the ears of those who wandered the land. Travelers stopped, their hearts aching at the haunting melody that seemed to drift from from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some whispered that it was the voices of the gods, others that it was a sorrowful enchantment woven by unseen hands, but none knew the truth. None knew that it was the voices of 4 lost children crying out to a world that no longer recognized them. And far away in his great hall, Lur dreamed of his children's laughter and woke with tears in his eyes, not knowing why. The seasons turned. Time became a slow, heavy thing, moving like the current beneath the lake, endless, inescapable. The swans learned to live with the rhythm of their days. They floated upon the water in the mornings, sang when the sun fell behind the hills, and huddled together in the night when the world grew cold. But even the deepest sorrow could not erase their love for one another. They were still Finola, Aod, Fiacra, and Khan. They were still bound by the ties of blood and memory, by the warmth of the family they had once been. And so they endured, until at last their father came. It was a quiet morning. The mist still settled over the water when the sound of hooves broke the stillness. Lur had ridden through the night, his heart restless, pulled by something he did not understand. When he reached the edge of the lake, he saw them, 4 swans, gliding toward him, their eyes impossibly familiar. He fell to his knees, his breath stolen from his chest. Father Finola's voice rang out, sorrowful and clear. Lur's hands clenched against the damp earth. "My children," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What has happened to you?" And so, through their mournful song, they told him. Lur did not speak. His body shook with the weight of his grief, his sorrow spilling unchecked as he reached toward them. But they were no longer flesh and blood, only feathers and wind and water. "My poor children," he murmured. "I did not protect you." The swans pressed close to the shore, their wings nearly brushing his hands. "You are with us now," Finola whispered. "That is enough." But Lur knew it was not enough. It would never be enough. And deep in his heart, sorrow twisted into something darker. He would not let Epha's betrayal go unanswered. Lur's heart was a storm. The moment he laid eyes on his children, his 4 beloved children, stolen from him, their bodies twisted into something unnatural, grief consumed him like fire. But beneath that grief, beneath the weight of sorrow that bore down upon him as he knelt at the water's edge, another emotion stirred. Rage. He had seen much in his life. He had lost battles. He had buried friends. He had endured betrayals. But nothing had ever torn through him as deeply as this. His hands trembled as he reached for them, his fingertips barely brushing their feathers before they floated just out of reach, caught in the cruel enchantment that bound them to the lake. "My children," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "My poor children, what has she done to you?" Finola, steady as ever, did not let her sorrow break her resolve. She met her father's gaze, her voice low and calm, though it carried the weight of centuries to come. "She has cursed us, Father. She has condemned us to 900 years in this form, 300 here. 300 upon the Sea of Moil, and 300 more in the western waters. Lur's breath came in short, sharp bursts, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what she had said. 900 years. He clenched his fists. Epha, he spat. Her name was poison on his tongue. It was jealousy, Aod murmured. His voice, even now, was quiet, thoughtful. She wanted to take Mother's place, but she could not. She wanted us gone, whispered Khan, his small voice trembling. Lur's fury hardened into something cold and sharp. His entire body burned with the need for vengeance. He rose slowly to his feet, his shoulders squared, his eyes dark as storm clouds. I will make this right, he vowed. I swear it upon the gods themselves. Epha will pay for what she has done. But Finola, wise beyond her years, shook her head. Father, she said gently, she has already taken so much. Do not let her take more. Lur turned to his daughter, startled by her words. But she only looked at him with sorrowful eyes, knowing too well the path his anger would lead him down. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he nodded. I will not let her take more, he said. But his voice was not soft. It was the voice of a warrior, of a father who had lost everything. And though Finola wished she could believe that mercy still lived in his heart, she knew that her father would not rest until justice was done. Lur rode hard for Tara. His horse carried him like the wind, tearing across the land with the fury of its master. He did not stop to eat, did not stop to sleep. He moved with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. And when he arrived at the High King's Hall, he did not wait to be announced. The doors crashed open before him, his presence commanding silence. The courtiers, the warriors, the advisors, they all fell back at the sight of him. Lur was not a man to be crossed, and tonight he burned with something more fearsome than any battlefield rage. Bodibi Durg rose from his throne, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Lur, he said, stepping forward. What? She has cursed them, Lur said, his voice raw, stripped of all pretense. Epha has cursed my children. A murmur rippled through the court. Bodibi's face darkened. What are you saying? Lur's jaw tightened. I am saying that your daughter, my wife, has used dark magic against my children. She has stolen their forms, twisted them into creatures of the water. I have seen them with my own eyes, and I demand justice. A hush fell over the hall. Bodibi's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the storm within him. He turned sharply to his guards. Bring Epha before me. At once. The minutes stretched unbearably. Lur stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides. His fury did not wane, but it was held taut within him, waiting to be unleashed. When Epha entered, she did so with her head high. She did not cower. She did not weep. She was proud, defiant, and unrepentant. Lur's breath caught in his throat. He had known she was capable of cruelty, but to see her stand there without remorse, without shame, it sickened him. Bodhi B. Durg stepped forward, his gaze like ice. "My daughter," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are accused of a crime most grave. Speak. Did you do this thing?" Epha did not look away. "I did." A gasp rippled through the court, but Lur felt only a cold satisfaction. She would not lie her way out of this. Bodhi B's face twisted in something close to grief. "Why?" he demanded. Epha tilted her chin. "Because they stood in my way. I was to be queen of that household, but I was never truly seen. They were a reminder of what I could never be." Lur took a step forward, his voice low and trembling with rage. "You stole them from me. They were never yours to keep," Epha answered, her voice like steel. Bodhi B. Durg did not speak. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. Then, with slow and deliberate movements, he turned to the druids who stood at the edges of the hall. "Prepare the ritual," he commanded. "She will face judgment." Epha's expression did not waver. Lur wanted her to beg. He wanted to see fear in her eyes, regret in her face. But she gave him nothing. The druids stepped forward, their hands raised, their voices weaving the spell that would seal her fate. The air trembled with power, thick with unseen forces. "You who have twisted the laws of nature," Bodhi B. Durg said, his voice solemn, "shall suffer a fate befitting your crime." Light flared. A wind howled through the hall. Epha's breath hitched for the first time. And then, where once a woman had stood, there was only a raven, dark as the void. Its feathers glistened in the firelight. It let out a single, piercing cry before beating its wings, rising into the air and vanishing into the night. A deep silence followed. Bodhi B. Durg exhaled, the weight of his judgment heavy upon him. "It is done." Lur felt no satisfaction, no relief. His children were still lost. Bodhi B. turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Come," he said, "tell me everything." And so Lur did. He told the High King of the lake, of the spell, of the years that stretched before his children like an unbroken path of sorrow. When he finished, Bodhi B's face was grim. "I cannot undo what has been done," the king admitted. "But I can ensure that their story is not forgotten." He turned to his court. "From this day forward, no swan shall be harmed in this land. They shall be protected in honor of the children of Lur." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall, but Lur heard none of it. He was already turning away, already moving toward the doors. "I am going back to them," he said. Bodhi B nodded, "Then go." And with that, Lur mounted his horse and rode into the night, the wind carrying the distant cry of a raven as it disappeared into the darkness. His children were waiting, and he would not leave them alone. The night stretched endlessly over the land, a vast expanse of darkness that swallowed the hills and valleys in its silent embrace. Lur rode hard, the hooves of his steed striking against the earth like the steady drum of war. He did not stop to rest, did not slow his pace. The image of his children, his beloved children, cursed and abandoned on the still waters of the lake, drove him forward with an urgency that could not be tamed. When he reached the shore, the lake gleamed beneath the silver light of the moon, its surface like polished glass. And there, in the center of it, 4 swans drifted, their pristine feathers ghostly white against the darkness. Lur dismounted, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. "Children," he called out, his voice raw. At once the swans turned. Father Finola's voice reached him first, soft and sorrowful. She and her brothers glided toward the shore, their movements as smooth as the rippling water beneath them. The moment they reached the shallows, they stretched their long necks toward him, as if seeking the touch they could no longer receive. Lur fell to his knees, reaching for them, but his hands passed through the space where their arms should have been. A sob tore from his throat, grief pressing against his chest like a vice. "I have confronted her," he said, his voice trembling. "Epha has paid for her betrayal." Ayad's voice, ever steady despite his sorrow, broke the silence. "What has become of her?" Lur's jaw tightened. "She is no longer among the living. The High King passed judgment, and she has been cast into the sky as a creature of the air, doomed to wander forever." For a moment, none of them spoke. Even Finola, the strongest among them, seemed uncertain. "And yet, we remain as we are," she murmured at last. Lur's head bowed. He had hoped foolishly, desperately, that Epha's punishment would somehow undo the spell. That with her gone, his children would be restored to him. But the curse had been woven too deep. Its threads bound not to Epha alone, but to fate itself. "I will not leave you," he vowed. "You will never be alone in this." And so, Lur did what no man before him had done. He made his home at the edge of the lake. He built a small dwelling, a simple place of stone and wood, close enough that he could always see the water. The people of his stronghold thought him mad to abandon his lands, his power, but he did not care. His children were here. Nothing else mattered. Each morning, he greeted them at the shore, speaking to them as if they were still the children who once ran through his halls. He told them stories of their ancestors, of warriors and gods, of the world beyond the lake. Each evening, as the sun dipped low, they sang for him, their voices weaving through the air like golden threads. And Lur, mighty Lur, the great warrior, sat and listened, tears slipping silently down his face. Seasons passed. The lake remained unchanged, a world unto itself. But Lur was still a man, and men were bound by time in a way that magic was not. His hair grew silver, his back bent with age, his steps grew slower, but still he remained. Still he watched over them, until one morning he did not wake. Finola was the first to notice the stillness in the air. She glided to the shore, calling out softly, "Father." There was no answer. Ayad, Khan, and Fiacre followed, their movements slow, hesitant. They knew before they saw. Lur lay upon the ground, his head resting against the earth, as if he had simply fallen into a deep sleep. His hands were folded upon his chest, his face peaceful in a way it had not been for years. Finola's breath caught. He is gone. The words did not feel real, did not feel possible. Lur had been their constant, the one unshaken presence in their endless exile. He had stayed with them when any other would have turned away. He had sacrificed everything for them, and now he was no more. Ayad let out a long, broken cry, and soon the others joined him. Their voices rose in mourning, a melody of sorrow so beautiful and so filled with love that it echoed through the land. The birds in the trees stilled. The wind hushed. The world itself seemed to grieve with them. The people of the land heard it too. They came from miles away, drawn by the haunting lament of the swans. When they found Lur's body, they laid him to rest beneath a cairn of smooth white stones, so that even in death, he would remain by the water's edge, close to his beloved children. It was said that even as the years passed, the stones never gathered moss, as if the magic of the lake itself refused to let time claim him. But time did not halt for the children of Lur. 300 years had passed, and the curse was far from over. The day came when the waters of the lake no longer held them. It began with the shifting of the wind, a sudden pull in their chests that they could not explain. The lake, once their prison, now felt restless beneath them. The spell, woven so long ago, was preparing to drive them forward. "We must leave," Finola whispered, her voice tight with sorrow. Ayad looked toward the shore, his wings trembling. "We will never see it again." Fiacra and Khan, the youngest, pressed close to their older siblings, their fear unspoken but understood. Finola took a steadying breath. "We have each other," she said. "No matter where we go, no matter what happens, we will always have each other." And with that, they turned toward the sky, their wings beating against the water as they lifted into the air. The lake grew smaller beneath them. The land of their father, of their childhood, faded into the distance. Ahead, the sea stretched vast and endless, its waves rolling like the backs of great beasts. The wind howled through the sky, cold and sharp. The Sea of Moil awaited, and the second part of their exile had begun. The Sea of Moil was nothing like the gentle lake they had left behind. Here, the water was never still. It rose and fell in great, heaving waves, a restless beast that never slept. The sky, too, seemed harsher, its colors colder, its winds sharper. The moment the children of Lur crossed from the soft waters of their prison into the boundless sea, they felt it, the weight of the curse settling upon them anew, pressing them into the next cruel chapter of their fate. The winds howled like mourning spirits, tearing at their feathers as they struggled to stay together. Finola led the way, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Behind her, Ayad fought to keep his wings steady, his movements careful and deliberate. Fiacra and Khan, though younger, were nimble, their their bodies light enough to ride the wind. But even youth could not save them from the cold. It struck them like a living thing, wrapping its icy fingers around their bones, settling deep into their very cores. The Sea of Moil was crueler than any winter they had ever known. It did not relent, did not offer even the briefest moment of warmth. "We must find shelter," Aod called over the wind. Finola scanned the endless expanse of sea. There was nothing but waves, waves that rose like towering walls, threatening to swallow them whole. "We keep flying," she commanded. "We do not stop. If we stop, the cold will claim us." And so they flew, hour after hour. Their wings beat against the relentless winds. The sea stretched endlessly before them, offering no respite, no comfort. They searched for land, for even the smallest rock to rest upon, but the ocean offered them nothing. The first night fell, and the cold deepened. Khan, the smallest, was the first to falter. His wings trembled, his body sagging in the air. "Finola," he whimpered, I cannot go on." Finola's heart clenched, but she did not let her fear show. "Hold on, little one," she urged, "just a little longer." But Khan's wings faltered. His body dropped, his small form plunging toward the dark waters below. "Khan," Fikra cried, diving after him. Aod twisted in the air, panic flashing in his eyes. No. Finola did not think, she simply acted. With a powerful beat of her wings, she surged downward, catching Khan before he could touch the freezing sea. She pressed her body close to his, trying to shield him from the wind, from the ice that clung to their feathers. Fikra and Aod drew close, forming a protective circle around them. "We cannot keep flying," Aod said grimly. "He will not last." Finola knew he was right. Then, out of the darkness, something emerged, a jagged black rock, rising from the sea like the spine of some great beast. It was small, barely large enough to hold them, but it was land. "Down there," Finola called. One by one, they landed upon the rock, their webbed feet slipping against its slick surface. They huddled together, pressing their bodies close, their feathers fluffed against the biting wind. For the first time since the curse had begun, they were truly afraid. Not just sorrowful, not just lost, but afraid. The sea roared around them, the wind screaming through the night. They pressed against one another, drawing what little warmth they could from their fragile forms. "We will not die here," Finola whispered, as much to herself as to them. "We are still together," Khan whimpered against her side, his small body shivering. "It hurts," he whispered. Finola closed her eyes. "I know." And so they endured the first night upon the Sea of Moil, battered by the elements, kept alive only by their love for one another. The days blurred into one another. They moved between the rocks of the sea, resting when they could, flying when the waves threatened to swallow them whole. The cold never left them. It sank into their bones, turning them into creatures of ice and wind. They lost track of time. One winter melted into the next. They no longer spoke of home. They no longer spoke of rescue. Hope, once so bright, had begun to dim. Then, one night, a storm unlike any they had ever seen descended upon them. The sky split open with lightning, casting eerie silver light upon the waves. The wind screamed like a vengeful god, throwing them into the chaos of the storm. They tried to hold onto the rocks, but the sea ripped them away. They tried to stay together, but the wind dragged them apart. Finola fought against the storm, her wings burning with exhaustion. Ayad, Fiacra, Khan, she cried, but their voices were lost to the fury of the sea. A wave, taller than any she had ever seen, rose before her. It crashed down with the force of a mountain, and then everything went black. When Finola awoke, she was alone. The sea stretched endlessly before her, calm now, as if the storm had never been. She drifted upon the water, her body limp, her wings too weak to move. Panic surged through her. Ayad, she called. Fiacra, Khan. Silence. Terror clutched at her heart. Had the storm taken them? Had the sea swallowed them whole? Then, in the distance, a cry, faint but unmistakable. With the last of her strength, she pushed her wings against the water, forcing herself forward. And there, floating upon the waves, were her brothers. Fiacra and Khan clung to one another, their bodies barely moving. Ayad drifted beside them, his breaths shallow, his feathers torn from the storm. Finola reached them, pressing close, her heart hammering. "You're alive," she whispered, voice breaking. Ayad barely opened his eyes. "We stayed," he murmured. "We stayed together." Tears slipped down Finola's face. They had survived the storm. They had survived the cold. But they had centuries still to endure, and the sea would not spare them from its cruelty. The years on the Sea of Moil stretched endlessly, a bitter expanse of time marked only by the turning of the seasons. The children of Lur became creatures of the wind and water, their wings carrying them across the shifting tides, their voices the only warmth they had left. The winters were cruelest. Ice formed on their feathers, dragging them down into the frigid depths if they were not careful. Their bodies grew frail, their strength waning under the weight of the endless cold. At night, they huddled together on jagged rocks, trembling against the wind, their voices weaving sorrowful songs into the darkness. It was their singing that kept them alive, even as the world around them remained merciless, even as the sea sought to break them. Their voices rose above the waves. Their songs carried their pain, their longing, their unyielding love for one another, and the world listened. Travelers who passed near the Sea of Moil spoke of the haunting melodies that drifted through the mist. Songs so filled with sorrow and beauty that they brought even the hardest of men to tears. But no one knew who sang them. No one knew that the voices belonged to 4 lost children, clinging to each other against a fate that refused to release them. One summer, when the sea was calmer than usual, they saw a ship. was a great vessel, its sails full of the warm breeze, its wood gleaming under the golden sunlight. The sight of it sent a rush of hope through them, something they had not felt in years. "Could they help us?" Khan asked, his voice small. Finola hesitated. They had not seen another soul since leaving their father's lake. They had stopped believing that the world still existed beyond the sea. But now, "Let us try," she said. Gathering their strength, they flew toward the ship, their wings beating against the air. As they neared, they saw men upon the deck, their faces weathered but kind. One of them, a man with silver-threaded hair and robes of deep blue, looked up as they approached. His eyes widened. "By the gods," he breathed. The other sailors turned, their expressions shifting from confusion to awe. The swans landed upon the deck, exhaustion weighing them down. Finola stepped forward, her heart hammering. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "We are not what we seem." The men flinched, but the elder among them, the one who had first seen them, stepped closer. "I know your tale," he murmured. "I have heard your voices on the wind." Finola's breath caught. "You know who we are." He nodded solemnly. "The children of Lur." The sailors whispered among themselves, murmuring the name as if it were sacred. Finola's hope surged. "Can you help us? Can you break this curse?" The elder's face was lined with sorrow. "I wish I could," he said, "but this magic is beyond mortal hands. It was bound to time itself, woven into the very fabric of the world." Ayad lowered his head. Fiacra and Khan huddled close, their feathers rustling in despair. "But you are not forgotten," the elder continued. "The land still mourns you. The people still speak your names." Finola swallowed the lump in her throat. It was not enough, not nearly enough, but still, it was something. They were remembered. They were loved, even after all this time. The sailors offered them food, soft bread soaked in water. And though it could not truly sustain them, the kindness warmed them more than any meal could. They stayed upon the deck until nightfall, their bodies resting for the first time in what felt like centuries. But when the dawn came, the curse pulled at them once more. The sea called them back. Finola knew they could not resist it. With aching hearts, they bid the sailors farewell and took to the sky once more, their wings carrying them back toward the endless water. The men upon the ship watched them go, their eyes filled with sorrow, and as the swans disappeared into the horizon, their voices rose in song once more, a song of farewell, of gratitude, of sorrow that had no end. 300 years passed, 300 years of cold, of storms, of longing, 300 years of survival. And then at last, the curse shifted. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sea in silver and gold, the air around them changed. A strange warmth touched their feathers, soft and unfamiliar. Finola's breath hitched. "The spell," she whispered. "It is changing." Ayad's tired eyes met hers. "Is it ending?" She wished she knew. Then, like a gust of wind, the unseen force that had bound them to the sea suddenly released them. The magic that had chained them to these waters unraveled, sweeping them forward with an invisible hand. Finola barely had time to shout to her brothers before they were lifted into the sky, carried westward by a force beyond their control. The wind howled in their ears. The sea became a blur beneath them, and before they could grasp what was happening, they were somewhere new. The western waters, the final part of their exile, had begun. The western seas were not as cruel as the Sea of Moil. The air was softer, the waters calmer, but they were still prisoners, still bound to a fate that refused to let them go. They drifted between islands, landing upon cliffs and rocky shores when the nights grew too long. They spoke less now, their exhaustion too deep to be put into words. They had survived 600 years, but survival was not living, and their hearts, though strong, had begun to break. Fiacra, once so full of laughter, now barely spoke. Khan, the youngest, no longer dreamed of home. Aod carried silence like a burden, his voice seldom heard, and Finola, who had held them together for so long, felt the weight of their sorrow pressing down upon her. How much longer could they endure this? Would they ever truly be free? And if they were, would there be anything left of them to save? Would you like me to continue with part 9? The western seas were vast and endless, but they carried a different silence, one that was not as cruel as the Sea of Moil, yet still weighed upon the hearts of the 4 swans. Time had unraveled them. The days blended into nights. The seasons turned and faded, and though their feathers remained white as the first snow, they felt the centuries upon them. They were tired, not just in body, but in soul. Finola had always been their strength, but even she had begun to wane. There were nights when she could no longer summon words of comfort, when she simply pressed close to her brothers, allowing their silent grief to wrap around her like the waves of the tide. Fiacra and Khan, once mischievous and full of light, now spoke little. They clung to one another, their bond unshaken even as the years stripped them of everything else. Aod, their quiet, steady brother, had become a ghost of himself. He was watchful, always listening to the world, but he rarely spoke unless necessary. And Finola could feel it in her bones. Something was ending. They had spent 300 years upon the lake, 300 upon the Sea of Moil, and now 300 more upon the western waters. 900 years. The curse had run its course. But what did that mean? Would they finally be freed? Would they awaken upon the shores as children once more, their bodies untouched by time? Or would they simply cease to exist, their souls unraveling like the mist upon the waves? She did not know, and that uncertainty gripped her heart with fear, unlike anything she had ever known. It was Aod who first noticed the change. One evening, as the sun dipped low upon the horizon, he He lifted his head, his feathers ruffling. "Do you hear that?" he murmured. Fiacre and Khan stirred, their weariness momentarily forgotten. Finola frowned. "Hear what?" Aod tilted his head, listening. A bell, a single, distant bell, ringing from somewhere beyond the sea. The sound sent a shiver through them, not of fear, but of something else, something Finola had not felt in centuries. Hope. The next morning they saw it. Land, but not just any land. A monastery, rising from the rocky shores like something out of a dream. A great stone structure, its walls touched with ivy, its windows glowing with soft candlelight. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, and standing at the water's edge was a man, his robes billowing in the wind, his hands clasped before him. A priest. Finola's heart pounded. They had not seen another soul in hundreds of years. Slowly, hesitantly, they glided toward the shore, their webbed feet sinking into the shallow waters as they approached. The priest watched them with wide eyes, his expression one of awe. "By the heavens," he murmured, "it is you." Finola's breath hitched. "You know us," she whispered. The priest dropped to his knees. "The children of Lur," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "Your story has never been forgotten. Your sorrow has been carried on the wind, sung by the waters." And now he lifted his hands, his voice shaking. "The time has come." Finola's heart clenched. She turned to her brothers. Was this it? Was this where their fate would finally be rewritten? Aod met her gaze, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "What happens now?" The priest's voice was filled with certainty. "You must come with me." The monastery was a place of peace. For the first time in 900 years, they were sheltered from the wind. The cold no longer gnawed at their bones. The walls were strong, the halls quiet, the air thick with the scent of wax and parchment. The monks welcomed them not as creatures, but as lost souls, offering them warmth, kindness, and prayer. They did not fear them. They did not turn them away. For the first time in their endless exile, they were home. But the spell still held. Their bodies remained feathered, their voices still woven with sorrow. And yet, something in the air had shifted. The magic was fading. The priest who had found them, Brother Sairon, believed he knew why. "The world has changed," he told them one evening as they rested near the monastery's great hearth. "The old magic is breaking. The power that bound you to this fate is no longer as strong as it once was." Finola listened, her heart thudding in her chest. "Then the curse will lift." Brother Sairon hesitated. "I believe so." The words filled her with both hope and dread. Would they be returned to the children they once were? Or would time finally claim them, turning 900 years of sorrow into dust? She was afraid, and yet she knew there was no turning back. The moment had come. It was time to let go. The final dawn arrived without warning. The sky was a soft blush of pink and gold. The air thick with something Finola could not name. She awoke to the sound of church bells ringing, their chimes echoing through the hills. Her brothers stirred beside her, their feathers rustling. And then a warmth, a deep, impossible warmth spreading through her chest, her wings, her very soul. She gasped, her body trembling. The magic was unraveling. She turned to Ayod, to Fiacra, to Khan. Their eyes were wide, their bodies glowing faintly in the soft morning light. And then, pain. It was not a cruel pain, not like the cold of the sea or the ache of loneliness. It was a pain of change, of rebirth, of something breaking and being rebuilt all at once. Their wings became arms, their feathers became flesh, their voices, for the first time in centuries, became human once more. And when the light faded, 4 figures stood where swans had once been. The children of LOTR had returned, but time had not waited for them. They were not children. Their bodies were old, their skin lined with the weight of centuries. They had lived 900 years, and now, finally, time had claimed them. Finola lifted her hands, staring at them in wonder. They were wrinkled, thin, fragile. She turned to her brothers, who looked upon her with the same realization. They were free, but they would not live long. Brother Syaran fell to his knees, his eyes wet with tears. "You have been restored," he whispered. "But your time in this world is ending." Finola swallowed. She had known, somehow, that this would be the price. She turned to her brothers, her heart aching. "We are together," she said softly. Ayod took her hand. Fiacra and Khan pressed close, and as the morning sun bathed them in golden light, they closed their eyes. Their bodies, so long denied rest, finally grew still. Their souls, so long bound, finally rose. And as they faded into the light, the wind carried their voices one last time, a song filled with sorrow and love and the peace that had been so long denied. The children of LOTR were free. At last, the dawn stretched golden over the hills, a quiet hush settling over the monastery as the last echoes of the children's voices faded into the wind. Finola, Ayod, Fiacra, and Khan were gone not in sorrow, not in pain, but in peace. For the first time in 900 years, they were free. Brother Syaran knelt beside their still forms, tears slipping silently down his face. The monks who had gathered around them bowed their heads in reverence, understanding that they had witnessed something sacred. The curse had lifted, but time had not been kind. The moment they returned to human form, their bodies had aged to match the years they had endured, and the world had gently released them from its hold. "They are together," one of the monks whispered. "They have found rest," another murmured. Brother Syaran exhaled, placing a trembling hand over his heart. "They will be remembered." The news spread across the land like wildfire. The tale of the children of LOTR, long whispered in sorrow, now carried a new ending, a tale of endurance, of love unbroken, of a curse that could not steal their spirits. Kings and warriors, poets and scholars, all spoke of their fate, ensuring their names would never be forgotten. Bards wove their sorrowful song into melodies that drifted through the halls of kings and the cottages of the common folk. No one who heard their story remained untouched by its weight. In the years that followed, the monastery where they had taken their last breaths became a place of pilgrimage. Travelers came from far and wide, kneeling before the sacred ground where they had found peace at last. A stone was raised in their honor, carved with words that would stand the test of time. Here rest the children of Lur, whose love endured beyond magic and time. May they find peace in the halls of the gods, but their story did not end with the world they had left behind. Some say that on quiet evenings, when the wind moves gently over the hills, a soft melody can still be heard drifting through the air, a song woven with sorrow, but also with love. Some say that the swans who glide across the lakes of Ire do so in their memory, a reminder of the love that no curse could break. And others believe that beyond the veil of this world, in a land untouched by sorrow, the children of Lur live on, no longer as swans, no longer as lost souls, but as they were meant to be, running barefoot through fields of golden light, laughing as they once did, whole and unbroken. At last, forever, the end.